Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thanks for tuning into this episode, which is all about the winter holidays. We're in the thick of them now. We're already in December, which I don't know about you, but to me it's quite surprising. Time really has flown this year. Anyway, what I'm going to do is divide this episode into two parts. In part number one, I want to talk about the research on holiday weight gain and how much we truly need to worry about the holidays with regards to how they may or may not affect our progress towards our fitness goals. And then in part two, I'm going to give you specific strategies regarding nutrition in order to navigate the holidays in a way that's aligned with your fitness goals, but also with your life goals of enjoying this time of year, if that's one of your goals. Now, if you are an OG newsletter subscriber, and if you're not, what are you waiting for? You can subscribe via the link in the show notes. But anyway, if you are, you might be familiar with part one, because I wrote a newsletter about this just a couple of weeks ago. However, even if you are an OG newsletter subscriber, part two is something I did not cover in that newsletter. So that's what you might want to skip ahead to so that you don't miss out on the extra content in this episode. Whereas if you haven't read that newsletter yet, or if you didn't because you're not subscribed, then all of this will be news to you. Or at least it will be somewhat new because I have covered the winter holidays in previous podcasts and newsletters. However, I like to think that my rationale for the approach I take to these events, like many other events that might or might not be related to fitness, changes as I grow as a coach. So I think my thoughts have updated themselves since last year and the years before that. And now, without further ado, let's get into part one, discussing the scientific research that I'm aware of regarding winter holiday weight gain. First, I'm going to tell you why I want to address this research. And the reason is that, to my knowledge, the online fitness community seems to be divided into two camps when it comes to winter holiday weight gain. I can articulate my thoughts when it comes to winter holiday weight gain. Here we go. I said it correctly this time. Now, one camp will recommend you to diet your way to Christmas, to stay away from all the festive food as if it's going to give you the plague or worse, some weight gain. Gasp. The other camp will tell you that it's only a couple of days a year, so you can relax and have some higher calorie food without blowing a gasket. The research I want to look at suggests to me that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And today I'm going to focus specifically on a narrative review by Diaz Zavala, or Zavala, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, where the authors looked into several studies on weight changes occurring between the end of November and the first or second week of January, and they termed this period the holiday season. Since they looked at several studies, there were different sets of participants, and the participants in the reviewed studies fell into one of the following categories. Some people were simply living their life. They weren't necessarily trying to lose weight. Some were actively trying to lose weight. Some were participating in weight maintenance programs, so they had some form of coaching and support and accountability. Some were members of the National Weight Control registry, which you can usually join. This is a research project that you can take part in if you've lost at least 30 pounds and if you've maintained this loss, apologies, for a year or more. And the reason why this research project exists is that they also collect reports from the people on the weight control registry regarding the strategies that these people believe made them successful at losing the weight and keeping it off. But also they get reports on their daily life now, post weight loss, and they try to see if there's a pattern and if there are certain habits that all these people seem to have in common that may be associated with their success at maintaining the weight lost. So it's an incredibly powerful resource in order to understand not only how to lose a lot of weight successfully, but also, and most importantly, how to keep it off. Finally, there was another category that these participants fell into, which was what the authors referred to as motivated self-monitoring people, who were weighing themselves regularly and they were keeping track of scale trends. The results of these narrative review seem to show that, on average, the participants gained between zero point 0.4 and 0.9 of a kilogram over the holiday period, so between 0.9 and 2 pounds. In addition to that, the authors noted that participants who were either overweight or had obesity gained more weight on average than participants who had a normal body weight, in quotation marks, based on the BMI scale. At first glance, these results may seem quite dire because some participants didn't care about weight-related goal, but some participants were being actively working towards them. So what this research seems to show is that whether you care or you don't, whether you're trying to be mindful of weight gain or not, you end up gaining weight anyway, even when you're making an active effort. That sucks, right? But what we need to ask as a follow-up question is, did all the participants maintain this weight gain? Because if that were the case, well, yeah, that would be a pretty dire outcome. Now, before I get into discussing that, I need to point out that only 2 of the studies reviewed followed up with the participants to find out whether their holiday weight gain was maintained after the period of time studied, so the period between the end of November and the start of January. So this wasn't all of the studies, which means that the strength of this evidence is weaker because obviously the more studies you have, the greater the sample size, the stronger the evidence you're looking at is. Even so, it's still interesting. Now, there was one study in which the participants did not have to be interested in fitness in order to take part. And in fact, only 15% of these participants reported that they were actively trying to lose weight over the period of time that the particular study assessed. Now, the outcome of this study was that the participants did, on average, maintain the weight gain, and it also appeared to represent more than 50% of the weight that they gained over the course of the whole year. So this is a double whammy. Not only did they gain weight over this period, but it was also more than half of the weight they gained across the entire year. And you might be thinking, well, that's not so bad, Nick, because if they only gained up to 2 pounds in a year, and that was over 50% of their weight gain, so maybe in total they gained, 3 pounds, 4 pounds? That doesn't sound so terrible. Now, if that was limited to a single year, I would concur with you. The problem is that we see that people's body weight trend upwards year to year, which is why we have what's called an obesity epidemic, where a great number of people have overweight or are overweight or suffer with obesity. And what research seems to show is that people who are overweight or have obesity don't gain this weight overnight. They wake up 3 months later and all of a sudden they're 30 pounds overweight. It accumulates slowly and subtly over time. whereby they gain a little bit every single year. That's why I think that the particular outcome of this study is significant, because it shows that more than half of the weight that a lot of people gain that leads to overweight or obesity comes from this period of time, the winter holidays. Now, moving on to the other study, the participants were all the above mentioned motivated self-monitoring people. So they were weighing themselves regularly, they were looking at weight trends over time, and in their case, the weight gain was, according to the paper, quickly reversed. So they lost the weight that they gained. Not only that, but the participants also lost weight on average for the rest of the year. So clearly, this is a much more encouraging result. Now, what does this mean? In my view, what this narrative review suggests is that the best approach to prevent or to reverse any weight gain that may or may not occur during the winter holidays is to be either working towards long-term healthy habits or already maintaining pre-existing healthy habits that you've already built and worked hard on for a period of time. And since you're listening to this, I can only assume that you're keen on your fitness, my dear listener. So the chances are that you already fall into one of these two categories. Not only that, but I think it's also important to remember that researchers draw averages. At an individual level, you most certainly have the potential not to gain any weight over the holidays if that isn't a goal that you want to pursue right now. And in fact, that's been the case for a lot of my clients over the years. That's why I believe that it can be the same for you too. And I'm going to cover some strategies in part two to help you achieve exactly that. Now, having said that, even the, in quotation marks, worst case scenario where you gain a little bit of weight isn't all that bad, because all you need to do is to keep working on your healthy habits for the vast majority of the year, and you will be able to lose this weight again and continue progressing towards your fitness goals. In my opinion, it was very important to start with this conversation because I began by mentioning the two camps that I see in the online fitness community. And I think that sometimes both camps take the attention they place on the on the winter holidays to an extreme where they pummel you with content from November up until the end of December, where they'll say, hey, you still have 8 weeks to Christmas, 6 weeks to Christmas, 4 weeks to Christmas. You still have time to join my program, my diet, whatever it may be, make some healthy lifestyle changes, lose a little bit of weight, feel confident in your clothes, prevent the dreadful, in quotation marks, weight gain over Christmas or Christmas blowout, as I've seen it referred to sometimes. In any case, I believe that there's a little bit too much fear-mongering, a little bit too much marketing regarding this particular phase of the year, and there isn't enough focus on reminding you that it's only 6 weeks out of the entire year. And what really matters most is the average of your behaviors over time, not the behavior you adopt on a single day or a couple of weeks. Yes, the research shows that if you're not really paying attention to your fitness, you can gain this weight and not be able to lose it again. And then that will contribute to overweight and potentially obesity. That is true. But it also seems to show, at least from one study, that if you are mindful of your fitness habits, you can also revert the weight gain, and not only that, but continue making progress, which, even though it was only one study, it has to be true. Otherwise, nobody would ever achieve any fit physique or performance or health goal, because they would be continuously thwarted by these 6 weeks out of the year. So I want to address the potential for the fitness, I keep saying the fitness holidays, the winter holidays, to compromise your fitness goals, and I do want to give you strategies to navigate them successfully. But the reason why I want to do that isn't that I am terribly afraid and I want to scare you into thinking the same, that the winter holidays are going to hold you back. The reason why I want to give you these strategies is that a lot of people are afraid that the winter holidays will compromise their results. They get anxiety around food at this time of year. They get anxiety about making it to the gym, training as much as they want to, skipping workouts. And this is a festive period. But if you get anxiety, it's not really festive, is it? And it doesn't really contribute positively to your relationship with fitness. So I'm going to give you these strategies to help you nurture a positive relationship with your body, exercise, and nutrition over this period of time. Not because I'm dreading the fact that potentially you might gain a little bit of weight. And I want to make that very clear. Now, to conclude part one, what are the most successful habits to prevent or reverse any weight gain that may occur at any point in your life or specifically during these periods? This isn't going to be a surprise to you, dear listeners, if you've followed this podcast for any length of time, but I do want to mention to you what my clients and research have found to be most effective. And these habits are in no particular order. Number one, move your body every day, whether you're doing cardio, resistance training, or getting 8 to 10,000 steps, or a combination of these three. Number two, weigh yourself regularly and track trends. Don't focus on a single data point on a single day. Or if you don't have the best relationship with the scale, or if you want to use multiple tools, which I would recommend, you can also use how clothes are fitting, your pictures, and your measurements in order to monitor your body composition, so your muscle to fat ratio over time. Number three, focus on a calorie or portion controlled, high protein, high fiber diet that also includes a small amount of highly palatable, highly processed foods. We're talking cookies, ice cream, fries, etc. So what some people term as the 80-20 approach, where 80% of what you eat is whole foods and 20% is highly palatable, higher calorie food. Number four, create a support system of people that actively look to stay or get healthier, like you do, so that you can have a positive influence on each other. And these can be partners, friends, relatives, and ideally, if you have the capacity for it, a coach. Five, do something with your life that gives you a sense of purpose and fulfillment. This may seem airy-fairy, but it's fundamental because it helps you better regulate your emotions, which in turn results in better consistency with nutrition and exercise, and a lower likelihood of issues like boredom eating, stress eating, emotional eating, or at worst, binge eating disorder. In summary, in part one, the point I was trying to make was that the real problem isn't really this holiday period. In some cases, I believe that some people in the fitness community, especially online, are focusing too much on whether or not you gain a kilo over these 6 weeks of time. And so as a result, you also focus a little bit too much on this. And you're not focusing enough on what matters most, which is what you do the rest of the year or on average over time. As always, the answer to achieve your fitness goals is a lifestyle change, not a short-term diet that you may do before or after Christmas to fix whatever it is that you ate at Christmas dinner. And while I don't think that anyone needs to be afraid of the winter holidays, as some people in the fitness community may make it out to be, whether accidentally with their messaging or sadly on purpose to sell you something, I do believe that these holidays can have negative consequences on your long-term health if you're not mindful of your healthy habits. And if you are, they could have negative consequences on your mental health in that you're so mindful of your healthy habits that you may decide to miss out on certain meals or social events because you're afraid that you won't be able to train, or that you will be forced, in quotation marks, to eat in a way that doesn't align with your goals. Vice versa, you may also neglect your fitness goals and end up moving less than you wanted to, eating more than you intend on, and whichever of the two camps you fall into, whether you're more of a restrictive person or more of a person who might neglect fitness, the outcome is always the same. You don't feel good by the end of this festive period, and your relationship with fitness doesn't improve, and it may even worsen. So now I want to move on to part 2 and give you simple and effective strategies that, if you apply them to the best of your abilities, will help you navigate the holidays so that you can enjoy them, but also stay on track with your fitness goal, whichever it may be at this time. Strategy number 1 is that in the vast majority of cases, I recommend my clients to move from a calorie deficit into maintenance calories. If they are in a surplus because they are looking to build muscle, they can stay in a surplus provided that they continue to train. But the idea is that it may not be realistic to be eating in a deficit, at least at some point over these holidays. If you want to be in a deficit from November until December 23rd, because you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, you're not American, or you just don't care, you don't really have anything planned over this period of time, and essentially going back to maintenance would be a waste of your time, then absolutely you can continue to eat in a deficit. But then let's say that on the 23rd you have a meal with family, same on the 24th, same on the 25th, basically 23rd to 26th you'll be with different family members, there are some meals planned every day. Then after that, from the 27th to the 30th, there's nothing on. And then on the 31st, you have a little New Year's party. And then from the 1st of January, it's all back to normal. In this particular situation, then you could go back to maintenance 23rd to 26th, go back into a deficit 27th to the 30th, then go back to maintenance for the party on the 31st, and then back into your deficit from the 1st of January. So whether you choose to go back to maintenance for only a couple of days or for a prolonged period of time depends on what works best for you. But I think that for most people, it works really well to try to avoid being in a deficit, at least on days when you have social events that really matter to you, so that you can be a little bit more flexible with those meals, but you can also shift the focus from fat loss towards nurturing performance and having a great time in the gym. Because over the month of December, especially the closer we get to Christmas, the emptier gyms tend to be, so that's quite nice as well to enjoy a little bit of alone time with the weights. Saying that, if you are in a surplus, I typically allocate a surplus to feed muscle growth. So when there is no stimulus provided to the muscle for growth, I don't see a reason to maintain a surplus. Therefore, if you were to decide to take a deload off of training the week from December 23rd to the 30th. This example works really well this year because Monday the 23rd is a Monday. Anyway, let's say that you choose to take a deload week. Then you could say, instead of staying in a surplus, I'm going to go back to maintenance calories. Now, I don't disagree with that option. I also don't think that you would incur any harm in staying in a surplus even over the deload. And I'll explain why. One could make the argument that training adaptations take time to occur. It's not like you train and as soon as you're done training, you've also added all the muscle that you're going to add from that training session. The adaptations likely take maybe a day, maybe 2 days. If there is any specific research telling us how long they take, I'm not aware of it off the top of my head right now. So I don't know exactly how long it may take. But one could make the argument that they take some time, so you may want to remain in a calorie surplus even when you're deloading. I don't disagree with these arguments. I don't disagree with the option to go back to maintenance. I normally give my clients three options for a deload. We can go back to maintenance, we can stay in a surplus the whole time, or we can do half a week in a surplus and half a week in a deficit. For example, if they're not going to take the whole week off to deload, but instead they're going to deload and do 2 sessions at the beginning of the week and then take the week off from Thursday onwards, for example, then I would say, how about we stay in a surplus when you're doing the deload sessions, back to maintenance when you're not training at all. And this is because the theory that I've just mentioned about the duration of adaptations is a theory. I don't know for a fact that it's true. I don't know for a fact that it isn't. And if the goal is muscle gain, I wouldn't necessarily want to harm muscle gain by going back to maintenance if it's not necessary. On the other hand, I also need to take into account a client's psychology. And some clients are really uneasy about staying in a surplus if they are not stimulating the muscles to grow because they're deloading. In which case, I would rather transition them back to maintenance to ensure that they stay consistent because they don't get scared and they continue to enjoy the process. Finally, it's also only a week. So even if you were to stay in a surplus and this theory weren't correct, and without stimulating your muscles, you were to gain a little bit of extra body fat, in a week, realistically, how much body fat might that be? For that reason, if you are in a surplus, I think you can approach the festive season, or at least a week where you might be deloading during the festive season, as you prefer. I would suggest prioritizing your ability to stay consistent with the process. So, as I've just said, if you are the kind of person who feels icky about not training and being in a surplus, or if for some reason you really struggle with appetites and getting all the food in to be in a surplus is too much for you and you just want some respite from that, that's also a reason to transition back to maintenance, because if you get that respite, you will continue to enjoy the process more than if you were to force yourself to eat for yet another week. So as a result, you might be more consistent than if you were to push through a surplus. Therefore, it really depends on the person, is what I'm trying to say. These are the 3 strategies that I typically take when a client deloads, and you can do with that what you will. Moving on to strategy number 2, my suggestion is to think of each individual festive day as a single day. Because a mistake that a lot of people make is that they think of the end of November to the start of January as if it's one block where they're gonna have to shovel a ton of food in every single day, like anybody is going to, I don't know, keep track of how much they're eating so that they meet a certain quota. No, my friends, nobody is actually concerned about how much you eat other than you. And importantly, there isn't a festive meal every single day. I mean, if you're that popular, I suppose if that's aligned with your goals, I'm happy for you. If you're that popular and it's not aligned with your goals, I'm sorry for you. Either way, I think if it happens to a very small percentage of the population. Most people might only have 5 meals that they need to worry about. Maybe it's Thanksgiving, a Christmas dinner, and then maybe dinner at on New Year's Eve, and then maybe an extra 2 because maybe you do Christmas dinner with your partner's family, and then you do Christmas dinner with your own family. So, there might be a couple of extra meals here and there. But it really isn't as big of a deal as a lot of people make it out to be. So first, think of each day, each festive day, as an individual day, and you want to prioritize the festive days that are most meaningful to you. For example, you might really care about Christmas dinner with your family and with your partner's family. So that's 2 meals. Maybe you care about Thanksgiving. So that's 3 meals. Now, you're not really fussed about the Christmas work party that you need to attend to look good in the eyes of the company. You might not be super fussed about the dinner with friends that you're going to have on New Year's Eve. So when you prioritize having higher calorie meals and being more flexible around nutrition, make sure it is for a good reason and because the event really means a lot to you. When the event doesn't mean as much, you don't need a main, an appetizer, alcohol, a side, and a dessert. You can have a relatively calorie friendly meal where you have a side of vegetables, some protein, and maybe a small amount of carbs like some roasted potatoes, and you call it a day. Once you've decided which events you want to prioritize and which events you're happy to have a more calorie friendly meal at, strategy number 3 is to plan in advance for each of these days, regardless of how high they are on the priority list. Meaning, don't wing the less important meals because these are all these are all meals that involve other people. So there may be some peer pressure going on. You might have a lot on your mind because you're trying to enjoy the day, socialize, stay away from Aunt Karen that you really don't like, and so on. So making goal-aligned decisions is going to be a lot more difficult if you try to do it in the moment. You want to make a plan for each individual occasion. In my view, what's important to identify is what's going to be available. And I spoke to Brandon Da Cruz at length about researching food options for when you eat out and when you're traveling in episodes 122 and 123. And I discussed how I do it when I travel in episode 124. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but research and ask ahead to the people involved, especially those doing the cooking, what's going to be available so that you can decide what you want to eat. And if you're tracking your calories, you can already pre-track the meals into your calorie tracking app of choice. If you're not tracking your calories, you want to pay close attention to the food portions you're putting on your plate right now, where you are aiming to maintain at the very least your weight, so that you can replicate those portions when the meal comes around. And you also want to pay close attention to how hungry and how full you are. If you are following a portion controlled approach instead of tracking, you're probably already doing this, or I recommend that you do learn how to listen to your body. But you may want to pay even more attention than usual to make sure that even in the thick of conversation, peer pressure, and your attention being pulled in many different directions, you can still check in with your body every now and again and decide whether you want to continue eating or not, based on how hungry or how full you feel. So, in other words, the strategy that you use to plan for this meal will depend on whether you track or you don't track, whether you are aiming to be at maintenance calories for that day, or whether you want to go above maintenance calories but still aim for maintenance calories across the week, in which case you may want to save, you will need to save some calories for the social event. What I would recommend against doing would be trying to eat as little as possible to save as many calories as possible on the day of the festive meal. Because on paper, it sounds really smart. You don't eat very much leading up to the meal, so you've got all those calories available, right? The problem is, the hungrier you are when you get to the meal, the harder it's going to be to listen to your body. And if you decided that you weren't going to overeat, because you can decide to overeat, if you decided, I want to be at a 5 out of 10 fullness, which would be even keel, in my opinion, you're not hungry anymore, but you're also not overtly full, chances are you're not going to be able to do that because you'll be starving. And even if you decided, I want to actually overeat a little bit at this meal, and I want to get to a 7 out of 10 fullness, where a 10 would be you're so full you're actually sick to your stomach, which I do not recommend. Now, again, it's going to be hard even to stop at a 7, even if you are allowing for some extra eating beyond the point of fullness. You might end up at a 9 or even at worse, a 10, because again, you have starved yourself essentially leading up to the meal. That's why I suggested instead to borrow calories from the days before or after. And when I suggest calorie borrowing, I typically recommend no more than 10 to 15% of your daily caloric intake. So if you're on 2000 calories, I wouldn't go much above 200, 300 calories taken away from any one day, because not only do you not want to starve yourself on the day of the festive meal, you don't want to starve yourself on any other day, because again, you might end up overeating to a point that you didn't intend for. I also don't recommend making any event, whether over this particular holiday period or at any point, all about the food, because then you get overtly focused on that and you start feeling restricted by the choice that you yourself are making. When really, if it's a choice that you are making, you want it to empower you, not to make you feel restricted, because it's only going to harm your relationship with fitness. So, when you prioritize these festive events, I talked about it at first as if I was talking about prioritize the meals you care about the most. And that's true to an extent, but I also wanted to say that it's important to prioritize these events based on what you want to get out of them. That's why I brought up the meal at the work Christmas party. Maybe you don't particularly care about your colleagues, in which case you don't really get anything out of this meal other than paying lip service to your company. Whereas you might care a lot about Christmas dinner because it's the only time of year where you get together with your parents and your siblings. So, what you want to focus on isn't only the food, which absolutely you're allowed to enjoy food and to look forward to eating your mother's pie because she's an amazing cook. I'm not saying you cannot. There is pleasure in food, and there's no shame in wanting this pleasure. But you also want to keep in mind that the food isn't all there is to enjoy about this event, and that you have other things to look forward to that have nothing to do with nutrition. And that can really help you make decisions that are more aligned with your nutritional goals. Finally, when you're planning for your festive meals, I don't recommend going for all of the food on the table because you're saving calories for it, but I also don't recommend avoiding all festive foods. On one hand, you could say, fuck it, I'm going to save 3000 calories and eat the world. And yes, if you save those calories, you won't necessarily gain a lot of body fat from that meal, but you are going to feel like crap afterwards. So when you're making your plan, you can absolutely fit in a main and a slice of cake or a glass of wine or whatever floats your boat. However, I encourage you to ask yourself, how do I want this meal to make me feel? And if you don't track your calories, or you do, you want to rely on how you feel in the moment as well. Meaning, if you track your calories and you've tracked a certain meal, you don't have to eat all of it just because you've tracked it. If you've already achieved the level of fullness that you wanted to achieve, that you set as your goal, you don't need to finish the plate for the sake of MyFitnessPal. And if you're not tracking your calories, then you don't need to finish the portion that you have in front of you just because it's what comes closest to what was on your plate a few days ago, since I mentioned studying your plate to really familiarize yourself with your portions. On the other hand, you don't want to avoid all festive foods. You don't need to eat the cleanest, so to speak. I don't necessarily like the term clean foods, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So you don't need the cleanest meal of chicken, rice, and broccoli every single time you have a social meal or a festive meal. Because if it comes from a place of restriction, it is going to harm your relationship with food. It is going to lead to that dichotomous way of thinking where you see some foods as good and some foods as bad. And if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you'll know that I strongly believe that that's going to affect your ability to achieve and maintain long-term results. So that's a big no from me. If you're somebody who really likes to eat super health promoting food, you do not particularly like desserts or alcohol or whatever it may be, and you want to eat the way you always do, knock yourself out. What's important is your intention. if your intention comes from a negative space, you are going to potentially harm your relationship with fitness. Strategy number 4 is to focus on achieving balance over the course of the day when you have a festive meal planned, as opposed to aiming for balance of your macronutrients in every single meal. When you're not eating anything out of the ordinary, it makes sense to aim to have a balanced plate with protein, fruit and veg, or veg, carbohydrates, and some dietary fat in the at least the biggest meals of the day, or the main meals, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner for most people. When you're having a festive meal, if you've decided to eat some cake, or if you've decided to eat a burger or something that's highly palatable, that's higher in calories, it goes without saying that that particular meal will be skewed towards a higher fat and carb content than usual, right? So don't beat yourself up for that. Accept that that's the decision you want to make because you want to enjoy that food, and that's absolutely fine. But also work towards having a balance then across the day, whereby let's say that you're having your Christmas dinner as the final meal of the day, and you know that that will be the meal that's highest in carbs and fats, but you're going to likely have less vegetables and probably little to no protein. Well, guess what? You've already, without even really having to think about it, you've already decided what you're going to have for the rest of the day, which is what you're going to miss at Christmas dinner. So you're going to have more fruit, more vegetables, and more protein, and you're probably going to cut down on the carbs and the fats because you know that they're coming in the final meal. So that not only creates balance, but also, and importantly, it helps you feel satiated. The reason why I'm suggesting this isn't that I'm obsessed with balance. These are the reasons why I think this is important. Number one, on a daily basis, protein is important because we have what's called protein turnover, which is the continuous creation and breakdown of protein, which occurs over a 24-hour period. The reason why I think this is important is that it can help you stay satiated throughout the whole day. And as I said before, I believe that being too hungry will come back to bite you in the ass. Because obviously, if you have high protein, high fiber meals, you're going to be way more full than if your meals were lower in protein and fiber. And in addition to that, it helps you stay on top of your macronutrient intake. I don't expect that you will get the exact same amount of protein and the exact same amount of fiber that you would get on a standard day. That's fine. But you can get as close to it as possible if you take this approach. The final strategy that I want to recommend is not to be a passive consumer during this holiday season. You can also proactively participate by bringing some healthy dishes of your own making that are aligned with your own goals. This not only obviously helps you stay on track and in alignment with the goals that you have set for this time, but also it leaves a good impression on the people involved, because who doesn't like free food? I don't believe for a second that if you told your mom, you know what, mom, I'm bringing a salad, that she'd be like, oh no, don't, I really don't want any free food at the table. I think she's going to be delighted that you want to have her taste something that you made, just like she's delighted to have you taste something that she made. So you're basically killing two birds with one stone, or feeding two birds with one seed, depending on how protective of animal rights you are. And with that, I have covered both parts of this podcast that I really wanted to discuss. I hope that you got a lot of value out of it, and that it's going to help you set goals that you are happy with, and that it's going to help you make choices that align with your fitness goals, but also enable you to enjoy this festive period to an extent that you're satisfied with. Of course, it's going to take compromising, but you can certainly come to a compromise that leaves you feeling satisfied and thriving. And that's what I wish for you. And in addition to that, I also wish you a great festive season. And if you want some coaching, now is the time to lay the foundations for a successful 2025. I can also obviously help you navigate this festive season in a one-to-one coaching context, which is much better than a general podcast, which covers as many bases as possible, but it's obviously not individualized. So you can apply via the link in the show notes. On that note, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.